everyone. This is Tamara from shelfaddiction.com, and welcome to episode 35. Joining me today is featured author Tiffany Gholar. She's a Chicago-based artist and author of The Doll Project, A Bitter Pill to Swallow, as well as several other titles. A Bitter Pill to Swallow is a young adult contemporary fiction title set in the 1990s urban Chicago. Today we're talking about diversity and young adult fiction. We'll be discussing why it's important to read more diverse books. If you'd like to get in on this conversation or give some feedback on this topic, let me know what you think and tweet at me on Twitter at Shelf Addiction. So let's just jump into this. Hey Tiffany, thanks for joining today. How are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing good. So tell us a little bit about yourself. I know I kind of did a little intro for you, but feel free to share something if you like.
Oh, sure. As you said, I'm an artist and a writer. My first books ended up being art books. I was really surprised by that because I had always had this idea from the time I was in high school that I would be a novelist and, do art on the side. But my art ended up becoming the thing that got me into indie publishing.
Oh, cool. So indie publishing, do you like indie publishing?
I do. I like, as a creative person, I enjoy having the freedom and creative control that it gives me.
Awesome. Well, I gotta say, before we jump into the topic at hand, I really like the cover art that you made for this book. The one we're kind of focusing on today. And I saw you had a series of different covers for this book. How did that come about?
Well, part of it is, from my art and design background, you kind of learn you need to make several different versions of a thing before you can settle on, one choice. And then the other aspect that led me to decide, okay, I'm going to keep all four covers was marketing, because I thought this way, Black girls can see a cover with a Black girl on it. Black boys can see a cover with a Black boy on it. Adults who like to read YA, but maybe I don't want people to know I'm reading a YA book, can have one with an adult. And these are all my viewpoint characters, so it's not like I was just making irrelevant covers. So that was the other reason. And then it gave me a chance to, even though writing blurbs is very, very hard, it gave me a reason to write different blurbs that kind of highlight a specific character's story arc on back.
Wow. Well, they look great. And not many people can make their own cover art. So, hey, that's a bonus for being an artist. It looks good.
Yeah, definitely saved me a lot of money during the process of putting the book together.
I believe it. Okay, so let's just jump into the topic at hand, shall we? So we know, there is, even though this topic has been talked about, for years, it seems like, but the lack of diversity in published books, or at least mainstream published books, it's still an issue. We need more of it. People not seeing people who look like them on covers, in books, in stories, on TV and movies and all of that, it kind of affects how, the minority sees themselves, whether it's race or, religion or sexual orientation, kind of all those things kind of fall under that minority heading. So what do you think? Why do you think that we don't have the diversity that we need to have in books yet?
I think that a lot of it has to do with the publishing industry and how it's set up. And, I think they did that survey that came out and found that most of the literary agents were, I believe, straight white women. And then I think a lot of the people in, at publishing houses as well were in that demographic. And so I think that was a big reason why, and a lot of times people may not necessarily even consider themselves having a discriminatory practice. They're just associating with other people that have a similar background, and they went to school together, or they play golf together, or whatever, and they're friends with each other, and so they kind of promote their friends, and they, so that ends up becoming a kind of insular industry in a way. So I think that's a big part of it, and I'm just glad though that in the past couple years, with the We Need Diverse Books movement, there's really been a push to get more diverse authors into the spotlight.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying, how, just like how the publicists and the people that are doing the acquisitions of these, books that they publish, they're looking for things that they see themselves in, or that people that they know, are in these books. They're looking for things that they're familiar with, in a way.
Right.
So why do they think that, other people who look other kinds of ways or live different type of ways wouldn't want to see themselves in a book? It's kind of weird.
Right, exactly. I just think it's unfortunate that, there's so many missed opportunities for authors of color, to be able to get their stories told. And it was just interesting to me as I was reading through some of the stories of different published authors and their struggle to get published. And, I remember there was an Asian author who was talking about somebody didn't want to publish her book because they were convinced that somebody already written a story just like hers. Like, we already have one of those. And it's like, no, you don't,
Right.
But just this idea that, people can't get past the ethnicity of a character, and they just think we already have one of those. We already have our book about an Asian teenage girl. We don't need another one. And, so it's just unfortunate that, some publishing houses still have that mentality.
Right, absolutely. So I don't know if it's a trend or if it's something that's new that's just been happening and it's just the new way of things, but I've noticed more than several Caucasian writers writing about minorities in their books, like as the protagonist, the main character. Like, have you heard of Rochelle Mead? Do you know that author?
No, I don't.
Well, she did the Vampire Academy series, and she recently published a title called Soundless, which has an Asian protagonist. And an author I interviewed several months back, he is a white gentleman, but his protagonist in his story is a Black woman. It was very interesting. I'm like, wow. So, I mean, I guess even, non-minorities are realizing that there's a need for diversity in books, and they are stepping up to the plate to help us out, I guess.
Yeah, I have noticed that, that either more people are doing it or talking about it. Like, there's one really prolific author. She's not a YA author, but just very, very prolific woman who's one of those people that just churns out tons and tons of books. And she was talking about how her publishing company did not want her to write this series that she had an idea for that focused on some Black characters because, it was, I don't know, I guess it was so different from what she was doing before. But I don't mind it as long as people are respectful and, they've really taken some time to understand the culture they're writing about. It doesn't bother me. I know there are some people who disagree with that point of view, but I've read so many good examples of that. Like, I'm thinking about The Diviners by Libba Bray and all her different characters, and I think the boy's name is Memphis. He kind of reminds me of like a young Langston Hughes. He's like this sensitive poet boy in New York, African American, and I thought she handled his character extremely well. Right. So I definitely think it can be done. I mean, I've also heard of some bad examples where it's just completely gone wrong. People are just
outraged.
The authors are just not paying attention and didn't really handle it carefully. But I definitely think that it can be done well. But I just think it's important, though, that people understand the call for we need diverse books was not necessarily we need diverse books written by more white authors.
Right.
The call was to try to get more diverse authors into the
I know.
book.
I'm like, to be really honest, I didn't really notice that until like maybe the last year. It's been more noticeable to me, and I find it interesting. I mean, I don't hate the idea, like you said, as long as the author does their research and they sound like, the characters are believable and it's done in a good way. But I just thought it was pretty interesting that's happening. I guess that's good. I guess.
I think it comes down to demographics and numbers. And when I was at BEA and BookCon this year, they were talking, like some guy from Nielsen was talking about the demographics of the kids who are being born right now. And, how I think there's almost like equal numbers across the board, or there's no, I guess there is no more true or minority group, or there won't be, you know, in so many years. And so they're like, okay, we need to capitalize on that. And I feel
Right.
like, I feel like that's what it's coming down to. It's
Right.
like, we can make more money doing this.
Right. But you know what, honestly, how I guess the majority sees the minority is also kind of somewhat reflected in what they read. And if the majority won't read books written by the minority, then maybe if they read some books written by their own, you know what I'm saying, and they
Right.
have, you know, Black or Asian or whatever protagonist, and they see them in a great light, then maybe they'll be more open-minded, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that, I didn't think about it that way, but yeah, maybe that could be a positive aspect of that trend.
Yeah, but I definitely didn't think, well, I guess they figure, hey, we need more diverse books, so get out there and make that money. It could be that way too, which would be unfortunate.
Right.
I mean, like, really? Okay. Instead of just bringing on more minority writers, you want to do that, but okay.
Right.
Okay, so we essentially were talking about diverse books in more of a, I guess, black and white or minority kind of way right now, but diversity could be much more than that. You know, it could be, you know, religion, it could be sexual orientation, you know, because even, you know, disabilities could fall into this diverse group. So, you know, people with physical disabilities and mental disabilities, it all kind of falls into there as well. So this is actually a great, you know, time to talk about your book, because your book covers mental disabilities, right?
Right, it does. Yeah, I just think that the important thing is just showing that there are so many different types of people in real life, and allowing them to show up in your story in a way that's authentic and respectful. You know, what you mentioned about disabilities made me think about it, because when the whole "We Need Diverse Books" hashtag came about, you know, I was just glued to Twitter and just constantly reading all these in the Tumblr that they had set up for it too, and reading all these different perspectives of people with so many different backgrounds who felt like they were either misrepresented or left out of books that they had read growing up, or if they were still teens, like books they were reading currently. And just, you know, even with people with disabilities, just talking about, you know, how so many times disabled characters are portrayed as being like a burden on their family, and their death is a relief. And I mean, it's like, who would want to go through life being portrayed that way in books and movies, or, you know, inspirationally disabled and things like that? So just keeping that in mind and being respectful and thinking about that when you write, or, you know, with my book, you know, just realizing that a lot of people would consider the word crazy as a slur. And so being mindful of that when my characters are, you know, when I'm in the third person and I'm describing different things that are happening in the story, and just treating those characters respectfully. You know, even, you know, because so there's such a stigma even now against mental illness, and even, you know, in the 90s, I mean, and, you know, the further you go back in the past, the worse it was.
Absolutely.
But yeah, just being aware of that and treating these people in my story as whole human beings who happen to have a mental illness, but that's not the full definition of who they are.
Right. And that's something that everyone just needs to remember in general. Like, yes, I am Black, but that's not all I am. You know, yes, you know, whatever it is, it could be any of these things we talked about that, you know, apply. And that doesn't make that the whole person. It's just a part of them. And that is something that I think lets everyone kind of digest easier, and, you know, just kind of, I guess, open their mind a little bit when they start reading more books that have all types of people in them, and they don't seem so scary or seem so mysterious. You know, it's kind of laid out.
Right. Yeah. And I think for me also, because I think part of it was because this started out as a short story that I was writing in the 90s. And I had the opportunity when I was in high school to be in a lot of different spaces that were either extremely diverse, or maybe they were diverse because I was there and my friends were there,
Right.
So we made it diverse. But it gave me an opportunity to meet so many different kinds of Black people,
Yeah.
so many different kinds of Asian people and white people and Latino, from different
Right.
countries, different parts of this country, with different accents and mentalities, even people from different parts of Illinois, like, people from like East St. Louis, they speak differently from people in Chicago. So all of that, just getting a chance to experience that. And so when I wrote my story, I don't even think initially it was, like, well, I need to have this many Asian and Latino people. It was just more just thinking about Chicago being a diverse city, although unfortunately we are extremely segregated here. But, just allowing the different people who interact with my main characters in the story to be from various backgrounds. And it may not necessarily, I guess you can tell by some of the people's first names, but it may not be as obvious in the book because I didn't really spend a whole lot of time dwelling on physical descriptions of my characters. But I did also write it as a screenplay. And in the screenplay, I specifically say, this character is this background or that background, so that, my hope is that, when it finally gets made, that it will be a diverse cast.
Oh, I hope so, because how people like to get at arms when something isn't right in the movie. So please do it right. Please do it right.
Exactly. Yeah. So I kind of did it in the reverse way, because I'm like, if I'm too specific about what everybody looks like, then, then people will be mad. Like, that's not what this person looks like at all,
Right.
So I just kind of left that out. And
I like it. So tell me a little bit about, the plot of your story.
Well, it's about two teenagers, Janina, who is 14 and is being treated for depression, and Devante, who is 15, and he ends up being treated for post-traumatic stress disorder. And they meet at a school for kids with emotional problems. It's called the Harrison School for Exceptional Youth. And the school is kind of modeled after a place that I had an opportunity to visit when I was in college and still working on the story. But it was on our college campus, and it's called the Orthogenic School. And it is, just like just like in my story, it's designed to be a healing place. It's a therapeutic boarding school. And it was one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. And, and one of the many things I do is interior design. So if I can say it's one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of beautiful places. So
it really is then.
Yeah. But the environment is part of the therapy. And initially when I was writing the book, I was kind of going more in the direction of like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, because that's, again, it's kind of like the lack of diversity of what you see portrayed in films. Like that's what you think when you think of mental illness. You think of this scary, foreboding kind of place. And this school was nothing like that. And so I was like, this is how my story needs to be. This is the kind of place I want to write about. So I incorporated that into the book. And so anyway, like I said, the school is designed to be this beautiful healing environment. And as a result of being in that environment together and their interactions with each other, it ends up changing their lives for the better.
Right.
And at the same time, while they're there, there is a young psychiatrist named Gail who is working with them, and she's there and she's trying to figure out if she still even wants to be a psychiatrist because of some bad experiences that she had working at a different facility. And so there's, so in a way she kind of has her own coming of age moment as well, even though she's an adult, but, but still you constantly have these experiences in life where, your idealism is being challenged and you have to face reality and figure out what is important to you and what direction to take. So, so that's happening, as well as the psychiatrist who's over the school, Dr. Lutkin, is, he has some moments as well where he ends up having to make some serious decisions. And so you see a little bit of his perspective as well. Mm-hmm. But primarily it focuses on Janina, Devante, and Gail's points of view. And mm-hmm. so the story is told through journal entries as well as letters and just regular old third person omniscient. So it goes back and forth.
Right.
Like a movie.
Well, I gotta say, I really like that you decided to put, I guess, the positive side of the mental health industry in your book instead of making it scary or, dramatic. And, it's just more normal, I think. I think it's probably, I don't know anything about that. I don't really know anyone who goes to any of these type of facilities, but I'd like to think that they are more like this versus what we see on television. That was nice and refreshing, especially as a reader coming off of reading lots of crazy books lately. So,
yeah,
to get into this, it was kind of like, okay, whew, all right, nice.
I just thought it was important because I've read a lot of those kinds of books too. And I just, I see so many times when it's like these kids are supposed to be getting professional help from these adults, and they're not professional and they're not helpful, and mm-hmm. they're totally clueless. And I'm just like, why would this person continue to be a counselor or a therapist or a psychiatrist working with teens if they were this oblivious? Like, to me, like, it just seemed jarringly unrealistic and unhelpful, because to me, it's like, if kids are going to read that, then they get the impression, well, if I'm depressed, there's nobody for me to talk to. There's nobody who can help me. And right. I never really set out to like preach at people in the book, but I just thought it would be, it would be helpful to show mental health care from a positive light. And then also it's another thing that can set it apart and make it different from so many other books that just make it out to be so negative or useless.
Mm-hmm. I gotta ask, I always do, is there a love story in this underneath it all? Because I know, early on there were hints that one character might have wanted a boyfriend. Now I'm curious, is there some romance going on in the book underneath it all?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yes. There is definitely some romance that happens in the book.
Well, I guess it can't be YA without teenage angst and a little bit of romance, right?
Right. Yeah. It's very rare that you see YA that doesn't have that. And as I was working on the book, I ended up, in the most recent version of it, I ended up looking back at a lot of my journals that I saved, because I used to journal a lot, and I saved my journals from when I was a teenager. And I would, just seeing how much I wrote about boys, and, it's like, I have to, like, that has to stay, like, that has to stay in there. That has to be...
I like the journaling. I used to journal too, back in the day, until my sister started reading it, and I could not continue. I just gave it up after 2 or 3 times finding them with their nose in my journal. So.
Oh no.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah. So ultimately, that's why I can appreciate a journal, some journal entries in here. I think that's pretty cool.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so before we talk about some ways that we can, I guess, consciously decide to read more diverse titles, go ahead and share with us where we can find your book online or in the store. Let the listeners know where they can find it.
Sure. If you go to abitterpill2swallow.com, there is a page that just lists where to buy the book. It's on Amazon, iTunes, Google, Kobo, IndieBound, and I'm sure there's a few other retailers that I'm forgetting, but it's definitely available online.
Awesome. So you guys go pick it out. The link is below if you would like to check that out, or at least the Amazon link. And I think Tiffany's website and a couple other links are below, so feel free to check it out. So Tiffany, let's talk a little bit about how we can motivate people to consciously read more diverse books. Maybe just start with deciding that you're going to read some diverse books. How about that?
Yeah, I think that is an excellent place to start, just by being aware, because I think that a lot of times you just kind of get lulled into a sense of complacency, or this is how things have always been. Mm-hmm. And I would say definitely looking at the We Need Diverse Books hashtag, or another good hashtag is Own Voices. That's highlighting works that are about people of color by people of color. So that's another really good hashtag that you can look for on social media to find more diverse books. Books outside of the ones that are by, the popular authors that you hear of all the time, and just kind of digging through the stacks to see what else is out there. Podcasts like this one, where you get all kinds of books that you may not have heard of before.
Oh, yes, very true. And there's also a website called diversitynya.com. I think that they actually have a list. I don't know if it's weekly or bi-weekly, but they talk about diverse books, and they're not, like you said, they're not all well-known authors or New York best-selling authors, but it's a wide, range of things on there. So that's a great resource as well if you're looking for something new to read. And I think I also saw a list on Goodreads. I think how they have the Listopia list. So if you're looking for some titles to check out, that would be a good source as well.
Oh yeah, that's definitely a good source.
Yeah, I love Goodreads. It's the best. Okay, since we were talking about sources to find some diverse books, do you happen to have any recommendations that you can share?
Oh, sure. Well, one book that I thought was really outstanding is Wonder by R.J. Palacio. It definitely deals with a character who, I believe he's half Latino, but also he has a serious disability in terms of his face is severely deformed. And so the book kind of follows him in his first year going to school, because before that he had been homeschooled, and the reactions of the people around him, and how he is mistreated by some or accepted by others. But it's really well done. It's really well put together, and definitely teaches, I think, good lessons about empathy and acceptance, and it's a beautifully told story.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Another good one is Jacqueline Woodson's If You Come Softly is a great book, and so is her other book that recently won an award, Brown Girl Dreaming. She's an excellent author. I just love the way that she writes. Brown Girl Dreaming is a memoir. If You Come Softly is a young adult fiction story set in New York, I think like in the early 2000s. Really beautifully told story as well.
For myself, I recently read, actually in one of my book clubs, The Wrath and the Dawn by Renee Adine. I think that's how you pronounce it. Adai, maybe. I apologize. I know I slaughtered that last name, but it's spelled Ahdieh. And it is a retelling of kind of like Aladdin. So obviously it takes place in the Middle East, and it's a historical piece, and it's, for those that like fun genre fiction, this would be a great option. All the characters,
Oh, that sounds great. That sounds like a really interesting story.
Yeah, it is. It's like kind of a retelling, but it doesn't read the same, and just people are just falling all over themselves about this book. They really love it. So I definitely recommend that one. That's the most recent one that I read and discussed with other people. So that's definitely a win. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. And one more that I really love recently is Shadow Shaper. That's a great book. And I don't even read a whole lot of urban fantasy, but I've really enjoyed that book.
Now, see, I'm going to have to check it out because I love urban fantasy. So I will mark that down.
Yeah, it's a wonderfully diverse cast. It's set in present-day New York, and there's so many different kinds of kids interacting in that story. It's really well done.
Well, I definitely added that to my TBR list because I love a good urban fantasy book. And I'm glad you brought this up because that reminds me of like my favorite, and I mean my favorite is L.A. Banks, and she's, not with us anymore, but her Vampire Huntress story, I mean, it definitely isn't technically YA, and as the books go along, they become a little more older, but when it starts early on, I guess it could be in the YA realm, the older YA. but she introduced me. She was my first experience in like urban fantasy and paranormal romance, and I just fell in love with it after reading her books. So I definitely recommend L.A. Banks, and her cast is all colors of the rainbow, and I love it. It's like nothing I've read before.
Oh, wow. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it's a team of people fighting, demons and all kind of crazy things, and it's about good versus evil and light versus dark, and it's so interesting. She just really nailed it. So I always have to bring up L.A. Banks whenever I get the chance. It's too bad she's not around to write anymore, because I would keep reading whatever she wrote. Well, thanks for sharing those suggestions with us. I think we've given you guys out there a good place to start. So if you'd like to read more books that fall under hashtag read diverse books, then definitely check out some of the ones we recommended, and definitely check out the sources that we mentioned as well. So I think that's going to bring this conversation to an end. What do you think, Tiffany? Do you have anything to add?
No, I don't. I'm just glad that I had the opportunity to be on your podcast, and I really enjoyed our conversation. It was great.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you were here. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks for listening, everyone, and I'll see you next week. But before you go, be sure to hit that follow button on Spreaker, the only place where you can listen live, or subscribe and listen later on iTunes, Google Play Music, YouTube, and the Stitcher app. That's all, and until next time, happy reading. Bye, guys.